Hello, I'm Lee Sullivan from the University of Canberra, and we're here today discussing politics with Michelle Grattan. Well, hi Michelle.
Hello.
Michelle, we finally have a date for the election. So Scott Morrison has called the election for the 18th of May. How do both sides go into the campaign?
I think Labor goes in a strong position. It's been ahead in the polls now for a very long time, for most of this parliamentary term. It's been united. It's got a range of policies. However, a campaign can make a lot of difference. And some of Labor's policies are quite provocative, they have losers, they will be very controversial, and the government will run a massive scare campaign against the ALP. On top of this, Bill Shorten is not a popular leader, and Scott Morrison will play on that as well. So I think it's going to be a quite fascinating few weeks ahead to see whether the government can catch up or whether Labor can maintain the strong position that it's had for so long.
Morrison put in his press conference the economy front and centre. How do you think this focus will cut through with the voters?
Look, it's a traditional coalition strength, economic management, or at least that's how we usually see it, cast it. But I think in this election, people will be looking not just at the overall economy, but they will be looking at their own circumstances. They will be thinking, my wages have been flat, I'm having trouble with cost of living. And so I think that will to some extent negate the wider economic management message. And even that macro message is somewhat compromised by the fact that we are looking at storm clouds, as the government says itself, on the economic horizon. Now, that can be both a positive and a negative for a government. The government can say, well, there are dangers ahead, so don't take a risk. But the economic growth rate has been slowing, so it's not quite as rosy a picture on the economic management front, and that's a bit of a challenge for the government.
In his press conference, Morrison clearly aimed to strike an elevated tone rather than an aggressive tone. How long do you think this demeanour will last?
Not long, I'd say. I think that this campaign will be quite aggressive from the government's point of view because of the scare element that I was mentioning before, that it wants to run hard on. So I think we'll see all sorts of claims made. I don't think they'll necessarily be truthful claims because, for example, in the last few days we've had this bizarre debate about electric cars, which at one stage the Prime Minister was suggesting would be the cause of us losing our weekends, that somehow we couldn't get out and do the things with the heavy vehicles that people like to do. So it'll be a pretty wild and woolly campaign.
Certainly, as you say, the coalition have honed in on scare tactics, and there's been a number of other issues as well as the electric cars and the loss of weekends. Things like climate change, things like the franking credits, etc. We've heard with this scare campaign, how vulnerable do you think Labor will be to that approach?
I think it's reasonably vulnerable because its policies are quite bold and they would amount to an increase in taxation. So people have to make a decision about whether they want lower taxes or whether they're willing to have some increase in overall taxation in order to get other things, to pay for more health services, to pay for education boosts, things like that. Surveys have shown that people, at least in theory, say they want services rather than lower tax, but in practice, who knows. In terms of income tax, of course, both sides are promising to cut income tax fairly immediately after the election. So when we speak about higher taxes from Labor, it's the overall tax burden, not the immediate income tax burden, which would go down for the individual.
The North-South divide is set to be stark in this election. In one of their final acts of government, the Coalition gave some final approval steps towards the establishment of a coal mine, the Adani coal mine in central Queensland. How much will this decision, or decisions like this, divide voters?
I think in the areas of central Queensland it'll be popular, people will see more jobs coming and quite pro coal mining. In the south though, especially in Victoria where the government is in real trouble, it'll be not good at all. There's a strong anti-Adani movement there, very well organised, supported by GetUp, which said the other day it was going to make multiple thousands of calls in a couple of key electorates, including the Treasurer's electorate, Josh Frydenberg, usually a pretty safe electorate, but still it's going to pin him down a bit in having to campaign there. So I think climate change is an important issue in this election, and that Adani decision doesn't help the government in trying to argue a case on that. And another place that's important, of course, is Warringah, where Tony Abbott is in real trouble, it seems, from a high-profile independent.
The federal election has started in earnest, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting developments over the next few weeks. And we really look forward to catching up with some of those developments as they come on board with you, Michelle, next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.